Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Tom Willardson. My day job is I'm the Presbyterian minister in Oshkosh, but I've also been a member of Citizens for a Strong Oshkosh since 2007. And I'm delighted to have you here tonight. We are very fortunate in Oshkosh. We have two of our representatives in the State Assembly are both serving on the Joint Finance Committee. We have Representative Schra, who represents part of Oshkosh, and also Representative Hintz, who represents a different part of Oshkosh. You don't overlap, that wouldn't. Yeah. Citizens for a Strong Oshkosh is a group that strives to be open and inclusive, and we hold events like this, nonpartisan events, so people can be well informed about events that shape our city, government work, but also other issues of common concern. And so we're going to get started, and I've asked both our representatives to talk about their experience serving on the Joint Finance Committee, and also to give us a brief timeline or an outline of the budget process and where we are at this point. Oh, and there are only 2 microphones for this room, so we're forcing them to demonstrate bipartisan cooperation, because I'm going to hold this one and they're going to have to share. Okay. So be sure to turn it on, Gordon. That's the on, yes.
Great. Well, I want to begin just by thanking everyone for turning out, and thank Citizens for a Strong Oshkosh for putting on this opportunity to talk about the budget. I think with all the moving parts and where we are in the process, and coming up for air and asking questions and kind of discussing what's on the table is an important part of it, and to get this kind of turnout on a Monday night is encouraging, and we've been seeing good turnout and concern and input both at the hearings around the state and other hearings that have been held in the district. So, just for a refresher, I'm Gordon Hintz. I'm your state representative for the 54th Assembly District. It's my 5th term, but it's my 1st term on the Joint Finance Committee. And just to give you the lay of the land, we have 33 senators, 99 state representatives. The Finance Committee is made up of 8 senators and 8 state representatives. So there's 16 members in total. It's broken down on a partisan basis. So there are the majority party, in this case Republicans, have 6 of 8 senators and 6 of 8 in the Assembly. So I'm one of 4 Democrats on the committee. Representative Schra is one of 6 Assembly Republicans. But we all, have, the 1 vote each, in the process, and, we really are just getting started. I feel like we've been talking about the budget for a while. So, as in my, in other years, every member certainly pays attention to the budget and has, input, and, all the big key issues that we follow as, in terms of the state. The big 5 are always K-12 education, the UW system, the Medicaid budget, state and local aid, and corrections. And that usually has always been, for significant period of time, about 80% of what we're talking about. And so that's your pie. While it's been different being on finance, that I used to kind of follow things from afar and attend finance meetings. There's a lot more attention paid to you, especially, in the minority. You don't get as much attention. You don't get as many visits. You get more visits if you're on the Joint Finance Committee, because, there are some issues where maybe it's not a partisan vote, or, they're trying to make sure that they're covering their bases. We do a 2-year budget in Wisconsin, so everything that we're talking about is, for 2 years. And it's not on a calendar year. It's from July 1st of an odd-numbered year till June 30th of 2 years later. So everything that we're debating and talking about and arguing is for the, in the future. It's for starting July 1st, assuming the budget's passed on time, and we'll go into 2017. And you're making your best assumptions based on what you think revenues are going to be over 2 years, with good information, but we all know things change. And what you think things are going to cost, and the same rules apply there. You try to be pretty conservative with those, and we get good information. Everything started last fall, really, when all the big agencies in the state, made their budgets requests to the governor. In November, the governor's office then spends 3 months or so reviewing those, making changes, making figuring out the math, what their priorities are, and then they introduced the budget, and the governor gave his budget address in the first week of February. It felt like we were ready to go, but you have this big, complicated, long document, that it's kind of hard to read because it's all sort of written in legalese. Really is about the first week of March that we got the papers from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, which break down all the into more coherent language about what law is now and what's being changed. Then we had hearings around the state. The Finance Committee had 4 hearings. The entire committee went to Brillion, Milwaukee, Rice Lake, and Reedsburg. We had, some of them we were there well past the scheduled time. Great turnout from all over the state. And then last week we started taking up the actual budget, and we'll certainly talk more about that. So we're making our votes, on individual items. I think the schedule is to try to have the Finance Committee go through the budget by Memorial Day, and then it returns back to the full Assembly and Senate in June. And so, let Mike fill in the dots and talk about. Sorry, and was that good? No. So.
Well, that's the problem of going second. A lot of times, even in the legislature, you get all the thunder stolen. Gordon covered a lot of the areas that are really the relevant areas. I am a second-term representative. I represent town of Algoma, a lot of everything that surrounds Oshkosh. I go down to North Fond du Lac and over to Waupun, and then I have a few very small precincts in the city of Oshkosh. I was elected for my first term last session and was unopposed and won re-election and then was appointed to join finance. I have a finance background. I was an investment broker in Oshkosh. I worked for Carl Henning Investments, and then I worked for Robert W. Baird for a couple of years. And I'm a small business owner. I own Leon's Frozen Custard in Oshkosh. Being a small business owner has helped tremendously with dealing with the budget. You just take about 6 zeros off the number, and then it's very similar. We're dealing with $68 billion in total in our budget, and as Gordon had said, the governor comes out, gives us a great big thick summary. We go through it. Every day we're finding different things that maybe were missed initially with changes. The changes to family care and IRIS, in all honesty, we did not see that right away. And we realized after a couple of us got together, it's like, oh, wait a minute, this is really going to significantly change family care and IRIS. And so not everything, is laid out right in front of you. It's a huge document. There are a lot of lobbyists that go through it. There are a lot of, the people at the Fiscal Bureau go through it, and then legislators and staff go through it. And we try our best to, make the best determination as to, what we feel is going to be best for the state. One thing that we are dealing with that I'm sure we're going to get into tonight is the fact that you do see in this budget a lot of areas being cut. K-12 is got a substantial cut. You're looking at a $300 million cut to the UW, and right down the line, a 5% cut in corrections. One thing that I always like prefacing the meetings with. It's not that the governor or the Republican legislature is anti-education or anti-higher education for the UW. It's strictly a matter of economics 101, what's coming in on the left hand and what goes out on the right hand. And everything being the same, we have a significant problem in one of our big areas, and that is our Medicaid funding and spending. And if you go back to 2012-13 budget, we had a total spending of about $7.18 billion in Medicaid. If you look at the 13-14 budget, it was $8.1 billion. So in one biennial session, Medicaid expenses and spending went up by $1 billion. Unless we're raising taxes in the left hand, you have to look at making cuts or being more efficient and effective in some of the other agencies. So One thing that will be coming up in the news, it'll probably be in the next, I would say in the next 3 or 4 weeks, is you'll be seeing some additional revenue numbers that'll be coming in. If you remember from our last session, when the governor decided that he was going to cut property taxes, there was all of a sudden this $350 million that was used for that. Those revenue numbers are basically numbers that come from capital gains and just people paying their income taxes. Everybody, is supposed to have their income taxes paid by the middle of April, and those revenue numbers start flowing in. We've got a good indication so far that they're going to be very positive. I'm not going to step out on a limb and say that they're going to be similar to where they were in the last biennium, around the $350 million area, but I think that they're going to be significant. We had a good stock market in 2014. There was some panic selling because people had profits, and I think that those capital gain revenue numbers are going to be pretty significant. That will flow down into some of the other policy areas that got cut. So I'm one person on joint finance, but I could pretty much guarantee that we're going to see the $150 per student funding for K-12 restored. I would tend to say that our caucus, the number one thing that will end up, and number one area that will end up where the money will funnel down to, it'll start at K-12. It'll probably be UW funding, local aids will be right in there. And I know everybody is nervous now with the UW being a $300 million hit. It's a significant hit. If you look at the total budget of over $6 billion that the UW has funded, it's a smaller percentage, but it's real numbers when you're talking about UW Oshkosh is going to look at about a $7.5 million per year deficit by those cuts, if there's no adjustment made with the revenue numbers that will come in. So as Gordon had said, we did the 4 public hearings. We're now in the exec sessions, and we're basically given a book 3-4 inches thick with each policy area that Legislative Fiscal Bureau gives you 3 or 4 alternatives on their recommendations, and you can take one of those recommendations or come up with your own. So the governor's budget that was introduced, that was his budget. We've got it now. The Assembly has it. The Senate has it. We're going to make it our own budget. Not everybody is going to be happy, with everything that's in it, but we're going to do our best to make sure that the vital areas of our budget are covered, and do whatever we can to mitigate some of the cuts that were initially announced. So I'm sure there's questions.
Yeah, we do have some questions for you to ask, but first I want to thank both of you for talking about the process as you've observed it, because you're seeing in much more clearly and more detail than voters get. And so thank you for that and sharing your observations. Mr. Schwa, I'm going to ask you to go first because Gordon went last time, and so you can steal his thunder. That seems only fair. And I hope you can take about 20 minutes as you address these topics. First one is, what
Total or 20 minutes each question?
20 minutes total. Always looking for a loophole, aren't you? Okay.
Both can talk.
I can talk too. Okay. What are the areas of your most significant agreement and disagreement with the government, with the governor's proposed budget? What would you like to change in the proposed budget? How would you fund those changes? And you talked about that some already. What revenue options should be part of the budget solution? And what policy issues are included in the governor's budget? And should these be in the budget, in your opinion, or should they be in separate legislation?
Wow.
Yeah, okay. I'll slide my sheet over to you, because, that's
do it one at a time?
No, I want him to steal your thunder. Yeah. It's payback time.
Significant, let's see here, significant areas that I agree or disagree. In all honesty, after going through the four public hearings, I think that the changes to family care and to IRIS are probably the most significant that are going to affect the most number of people, 55,000 people. As I stated earlier, we have to do something. Our Medicaid expenses are continuing at an incline that's really unsustainable unless we do something. Unfortunately, we did not get, in my opinion, this conversation should have been started 2 years ago in the last session. I don't think that you can just throw a budget out to the legislature, and Kitty Rhodes, in my opinion, really didn't have a lot of heads up on this. This was something that the governor's the administration came up with. It had maybe been talked about as a model in theory. Stakeholders weren't brought into the picture, and but at some point we're going to have to do something. The system with the 8 MCOs, we had a great pilot program in Fond du Lac that expanded, and it's throughout the state now. That worked really well. And let me back up there. So some of the people in the room and that are associated with family care and IRIS, when we changed from the county model to the MCO model, I know that there was an awful lot of trepidation regarding that. Nobody likes change, but if you look at the way that things ran with the county level, and they did a great job. My wife worked for Lutheran Social Services and wishes that it would have stayed with the county model, but it was switched to the 8 MCOs, and I know there was a lot of excitement about that and a lot of uncertainty, but it's worked out pretty well. Our theory, and I think the governor's theory and Kitty Rhodes, Secretary Rhodes' theory, is that we need to start making changes now, and because our spending, our Medicaid spending, is going to continue to rise. We have the demographics in the state that the baby boomers were just at that age where that spending is going to continue to increase, and it's a lot cheaper to keep people in their homes and taking care of them rather than sending them to a nursing home. Nursing homes can be 3 to 4 times what it costs to have cares with somebody in their home. So those are 2 areas that senior care is another thing. I think that there were a lot of people that were against that, and we did take that out of the budget. I know for some of the people in the county assessing, we heard a lot of my townships. I have 18 townships in my district, and I did not have one town chairman or town board member that wanted to see the county take over the assessing. And so we pulled that out of the budget. All along, when we hear from the general public and the voice is loud enough, there are enough people in our caucus that can make changes. Leadership may have an idea of how they want to go, but if there's, we have 63 in the majority in our caucus, and if we get 10 to 13 individuals in our caucus that are against something, we can make changes. And so those are 2 pretty significant areas. I know there's plenty more. I'll hand it over so I'm not taking up all the time, and I'll let Gordon maybe talk about a couple of the things that that he's against. Obviously K-12 funding and UW funding are 2 significant areas. I will go back and say, not to justify it, but when Governor Doyle was in office, there was a $250 million cut to the UW that he instituted because of budget concerns, and that was when reserves of the UW were at about 4%. Now we have reserves that are at about 20%. So I throw that out there, just so you know that it's not a Republican governor that, hates higher education and is cutting UW. It's just one of the bigger areas that gets cut because it's one of the biggest areas that we fund. And it's like any of your home budgets. You have $1,000 coming in a month and you have $1,200 a month going out. Either you have to go out and get another job and raise income for the state, that is raising fees and raising taxes. And, the majority has heard from the people of the state of Wisconsin that, and there are probably a lot in this room that wouldn't mind their property taxes going up. But when I'm knocking on doors in my district, and it's a 65% district, people are not telling me that they want their property taxes increased. And so, that's what we look at. You've got revenues coming in and you got expenses going out. And where do you cut when you have more expenses than revenues coming in? And you look at your biggest areas. In my restaurant, it's labor and it's cost of goods. In the state budget, K-12 is one of the biggest areas that we spend money on. As Gordon had said, UW, Medicaid, and state aids. Those are our 4 big areas. And so I'll hand it over. I'm sure Gordon has some things to add to this.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I've been struggling with is that it's hard to, where you start from plays a big role. There's been decisions that are included in the budget that I think go build upon proposals that we've seen the last 2 budgets. Someone who's been against the voucher expansion, I think the budget proposes lifting the cap on vouchers and funding them directly out of our public schools, which is something obviously I opposed when we expanded it in the last budget. And, I'm incredibly concerned about what impact that might have. And again, some of these things are fluid because I think there's, budget comes out and then you get feedback from stakeholders. And one of the things we're kind of hearing on K-12 education is it's very difficult to expand vouchers, cut property taxes, and still meet your obligation to fund public education. And I've had conversations with some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle related to that fact as well. So some of the things in the budget also, we made some decisions that I opposed a year ago that cut revenue, that kind of put us in a position where if you just assume that our only options are to start with the budget as it is, meaning, well, we've got this pot of money. Well, the reality is we have this pot of money because we've decided to have this pot of money in some ways. I mean, we made decisions and those were priorities, and Mike is right. I mean, when the governor ran on some of these things, including tax relief, and that's for voters to decide. And for some of them, maybe there's some remorse because this is what smaller government looks like. And this is what tax relief looks like. There's trade-off with some of these decisions. I mean, to me, these are sort of the trade-offs, and at what cost are they worth doing things. I would say for sure, by far, the themes that we heard, and there are numerous policy changes. There's some things that I don't know if I have an opinion on because we really won't get to the, debate or think about them or kind of, weigh the consequences of those until we get to those items. But the biggest items that we heard about of concern throughout the state from all different types of people were, the first 2 were, as Mike mentioned, the long-term care changes. And we have 55,000 people that, frail elderly, people with developmental disabilities, and Wisconsin under Governor Thompson started this long-term care model where we worked with stakeholders and we incrementally expanded and piloted it and tested it and made sure, and the goal was to right-size our Medicaid funding so that some people needed acute care services. Some people just needed meals delivered or help cleaning their apartment. But it was getting out of institutionalized care and getting into more independent care. And just like we do with our schools in terms of inclusivity and, building independence, we're kind of wired our state to move to this. And it's been a model program throughout the country, if quality and control of costs is your issue. we know that we do have a challenge with Medicaid costs, but when we did an audit in 2013, Family Care said it was going to save $30 million over the next 10 years. The governor went to Northeast Wisconsin a year ago and expanded Family Care and said this is a win-win for Wisconsin. This was definitely the biggest surprise in the budget. We pretty much got a proposal that says we're going to, in 2 years, get rid of everything that we have in Wisconsin and move towards a statewide managed care, most likely private insurance model that, and to a lot of the people who have benefited from the programs that we have and have become used to and are familiar and with the programs that we have, it kind of turned everything on its head. And so we heard individual stories from around the state about what these programs, Family Care and our self-directed program, where people actually get to manage their resources to best choose which care is right for them, best serves them. So this one's been hard to get because, as Mike said, I think the cart was before the horse on this proposal, and that we got this massive policy change that didn't seem to come from anywhere. We know there is an issue related to cost, but if that's the case, then we should look at how our existing programs can best be managed to try to save that money in the future and what tweaks there might be to there. What's proposed is sort of a dismantling of what we have now, and we're not really sure what it looks like. There's some other states that have that kind of model, but they didn't have anything before that. So that one's real complicated, but it's something that I feel strong about, and that it should come out of the budget just because of the uncertainty alone, and it should either be handled as standalone legislation, or we should study the issue and look at how we can build upon what we have now. I think the natural resource changes are completely out of bounds, and I don't know where some of them come from. I'm glad that the Finance Committee last week restored the DNR board to remain with the powers that it has and not just be, sort of exist to give the governor advice if he wants it. But the other long-term natural resource changes in terms of the elimination of scientists, eliminate of some of the non-point pollution runoff positions, I think what we heard from people around the state was that these fly in the face of the things that we really like about our state. I mean, there are some things that that made Wisconsin what it is. Strong public schools, an appreciation for our natural resources, conservation. They didn't belong to Republicans or Democrats, and that's kind of what we heard, that this budget sort of violates some of those things. And again, the long-term care changes and natural resources changes, for the most part, are revenue neutral. Those things don't have to be done, but it's questionable what the intent of some of those things were. On the UW system in K-12, and we'll get into some of the revenue discussions, to me, those are some of the most important investments that we can make in our state. And we know that even if revenue is neutral, which would be what restoring the 150 per pupil funding would be, there's still considerable challenges. Mike served on the Rural Schools Task Force, right? And it was aimed at the fact that in a lot of our parts of our state, we've got declining enrollment, and increased costs related to transportation. This budget seems to have goals on education that maybe don't meet the realities that we're hearing in the classroom. We heard from districts around the state that it's hard to imagine that we're going to be able to meet their obligation to provide everybody with an equal opportunity education. I know one of the questions was, what do we agree with? And I do look for those things too. I will say that I was pleased that the governor provided funding for one of the big challenges that's really bothered me for my time in office is there's no access for dental care on Medicaid. Dentists won't, just doesn't simply, not costs, they're unable to accept Medicaid patients at the reimbursement rate that it is. There's very few dentists as a result that takes it, and we really have a crisis of coverage for people on Medicaid. And we struggled with what the best way is to try to fund or find that increased amount, and at a time when we already have a pretty stressed Medicaid budget. And so I think there are 4 or 5 counties that the governor has piloted to be in a program where they're going to increase the reimbursement rate to a certain amount that should be enough to get dentists to be able to take Medicaid patients. And I think that, it's a start, and I want to make sure that that stays in the budget. So I do look for those things that I can support, and I'm sure there are a few others, but that was one.
You've got my notes over there. What's the third topic that you were at?
What should be in
What would you-
some
how would
items
you-
that shouldn't be.
Yeah, let's move down to revenue options. What options for increasing revenue are there available in this budget?
One of the areas that I didn't even talk about, that we have a pretty big funding gap is in the area of transportation. I just took a vacation and actually drove from Florida, and I came through all the other states, and when I got back to Wisconsin, my car suffered significantly with the potholes and everything. We have a real problem. In 2007, indexing was taken away, and that, I believe that was, well, it's not significant whose administration it was, but when indexing was taken away, it basically took away, it took away the natural CPI increases in the gas tax. Right now, our gas tax is about 30.9 cents. If indexing would have stayed in the budget, since 2007, we'd have about another a little over $900 million in our transportation budget. And the gas tax would only be about 4.5 cents higher than where it is now. I think that was probably a pretty big mistake. We wouldn't be sitting, with some of the issues that we have. One thing that I will say is the governor wants to bond for a significant amount to fund transportation, and there is a pretty big consensus in our caucus that we're against the additional bonding. We have to look at a number of other things, whether it's raising the gas tax, which goes flies in the face of a lot of Republicans that took no tax increase pledges. That's a really hard decision because we know something has to be done. I'm not a big believer in raising fees, but we have one of the lowest registration costs at $75 a vehicle, and we could look at increasing that, or we could just looking at the spending that takes place with some of the different projects. And really we have 3 or 4 projects down in the southern part of the state that takes up the significant portion of our transportation budget. The Hone Bridge, the Zoo Interchange, those are, multi-billion-dollar projects. And, we need to have good roads coming in. But then, I've got 18 townships, and every single one of my townships are crying for road funding, additional road aid. So I'm not sure where we're going to end up with that. We did take, was it 18 non-fiscal items we took out of the budget? 14 non-fiscal items. I, am not a big believer that non-fiscal items, policy being put in the budget. I was happy that, we were able to come to some consensus and pull those 14 items out. I can't list them for you, one by one, but I think it's a good step by pulling those things out. Other funding, I believe, as the governor does, that it's important to continue to lower property taxes. If you look over the past 15, 20 years, property taxes have been increasing. And as I said earlier, I knock on doors in my district. I'm not getting people telling me, hey, raise my property taxes. And the proposed $5 cut, I think, is a little disingenuous. I think it'll end up being more like a $25, $30 cut for the average home, $80,000 to $90,000 home, which doesn't seem like an awful lot of money, but it's better than your property taxes going up, in my opinion. And the unfortunate thing is we have had some school referendums that have taken place, and the $28 million school referendum that was passed last year, and so you didn't see those property tax cuts. That is one area that, when I attend my CESA 6 meetings, I look at legacy costs and I look at K-12, and it's really hard for us in the legislature to look at increased funding when, even after Act 10 happened, there are still school districts that have huge legacy costs. In the Oshkosh School District, it costs about $2.7 million a year for health insurance for retired teachers. And I know that that was a benefit that was negotiated, you know, and the teachers earned that. But going forward, there are going to have to be things that are going to have to be done that are innovative. We have a school district in West Bend that at our CESA 6 meeting, the question was asked, what is the per family cost, healthcare cost? And there's a school administrator in West Bend, Ted Knightsky. They self-insured, and they lowered their healthcare costs significantly. They have a per family healthcare cost of about $11,000. In Oshkosh, our costs are about $18,000. Well, if you take $18,000 per employee, 850 employees, that's, you know, over $5 million. That money's not being spent on education, you know, and that's not, you know, saying that we're going to be cutting benefits of anybody. That's just saying we need to do some smart things. We need to put, you know, in West Bend, they actually have doctors, a nurse practitioner in their school district. And they have HSAs, and they fund the HSAs, and they have high deductibles. But it's no more out of pocket for the teachers. It's just innovative things that administrator decided was important so that money could, you know, stick with our, you know, funding for programs. And so I think in areas like that, we have to start looking at doing some innovative things in our city here in Oshkosh and in the rest of the state of Wisconsin. So I'll hand it back over to Gordon.
Before Gordon, before you talk about revenue, people are coming around with yellow cards. If you have questions for either our legislators, write them. We insist that you write them legibly. It's important. And then when we've finished with your presentations, we'll turn to some questions.
Great. You know, I mentioned before, there's some big ticket items that don't involve revenue, the changes to long-term care, which I think should come out, and I know there's concern on the other side as well. I hope we get it out sooner than later. I think some of the natural resource changes are things that could come out that don't cost money. Obviously, the big things that there's massive concern about and where the large disagreements occur is going to be on the issues that involve state funding. And as Mike mentioned earlier, while we've begun the finance process, both last week's agenda and this week's agenda don't really involve the big things that involve funding, because we're waiting for that revenue report, which is going to be at the end of April and probably, you know, be May 8th or something when we take up that. And that's to kind of see, okay, what are we really working with in terms of our general fund dollars, and then, you know, how can we best work out a solution? You know, because K-12 is a big priority. You know, I'm going to try to do everything I can to, you know, I'm in the minority, but I always say you got to try to improve what's out there, stop bad things from happening, and try to hold people accountable. And so that's sort of the plan. And in talking with people, trying to, you know, pitch ways that we might be able to do things. I think it is a tough one when you're trying to both cut property taxes, and the way that you do that with schools is to, you know, keep a tight limit down and sort of fund the levy credit, you know, so you're using state tax dollars to kind of buy down the local levy. It's hard because a lot of districts that we heard from said, you know, look, I supported Act 10, you know, we use that to balance the budget, we've shopped out our insurance, we've contracted out certain services, you know, we pay $5,000 less than we did 7 years ago, but we can't, you know, we're not going to be able to absorb the proposed cut as it is. And, you know, so it really isn't, you know, you're not being able to provide the same amount of quality, and I think that's of real concern given the standard that we always had as a state for our public schools. So for me, I want to get those dollars in there whether the revenue report has it or not, and I think there are ways to do it. You know, I mentioned yesterday in an op-ed piece that you know, we still have a tax cut that we introduced that was passed in 2011 that doesn't get fully phased in till next January. We could delay that just for 2 years. and have an additional $78 million for this budget. We've been talking about it for 4 years, but the federal Medicaid money is still an option. You know, we don't seem to have a problem taking federal money in transportation and other programs. We do seem to have a problem taking federal money when it comes to providing low-income health care access. And even if we're not taking it for healthcare, I think we should take it for a budget standpoint, because I don't think it's good for the economy to cut the UW system, and I don't think, as good as the revenue report is, we're going to be able to refund everything that we'd like to and still maintain some of the governor's priorities. So for me, taking the federal Medicaid funds is a wise move, a good use, it's prudent. Considering delaying some of the other the manufacturing and agriculture tax credit expansion by 2 years, not getting rid of it, just delaying it, and then maybe looking at the school levy credit instead of putting into that, putting it into school funding in case that revenue increase isn't there. I hope we get a bump, you know, from the economy. I think there's likely to be more revenue maybe in year 2, and some of the budget problems are real challenges in year 1 of the budget. So, you know, these are things that, you know, we're going to try to throw out there as options. We're certainly going to propose them. I think, you know, we've had some areas of agreement. I think we all heard the same thing when we went around the state in terms of what people's concerns were. You know, how big those priorities are, how far we will go to restore those, maybe where there's some differences. I know that there's some, you know, the UW proposal initially, there was sort of the 2 big things. One was the $300 million cut, and the other one was the move to a public authority. And that one sort of ran into the same problem that the long-term care proposal was, and that there wasn't much sort of understanding or explanation. And what was, to me, sort of sold as flexibility should have been sold more as certainty. You know, I think the UW system realized that they're getting such a small part of their budget now comes from the state that it's impossible for them to govern. And it's true. I mean, higher education, and Mike mentioned this before with Governor Doyle's budget, higher education has shrunk all over the country, and a lot of it is due to Medicaid and K-12 expenses being a bigger part of the budget. You know, that being said, you know, we have a challenge, and I think the proposal for public authority is something that should be discussed. I just think it's probably not going to be able to be discussed in the budget. And I'm afraid that we might make the mistake that what I've heard from all administrators would be the worst case scenario, which is to propose a public authority without tuition authority. In other words, we'll say, well, we'll give you all the freedom and flexibility, but we will give you none of the ability to actually control your own budget, and that would seem to be a mistake.
So Kathy, do you have questions? We're ready for questions. Legible questions.
A whole stack of excellent questions.
Thank you. Oh, the stack just got bigger, thank you. And I guess, Mr. Schry, it's your turn to go first. The question is, can you see any good reason to sell off our state-owned lands and/or reduce conservatorship?
Well, stewardship is important throughout the state. I did not really know a whole lot about the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Fund until last session. Basically, our stewardship fund was set up quite a number of years ago. If you look at the whole state of Wisconsin, and stewardship basically takes land and preserves it and takes it off the tax roll. If you look at the state of Wisconsin, 18% of the state of Wisconsin is in the stewardship fund. It is either owned either by the county, the state, or the federal government. If you compare that to Illinois, if you compare that to Iowa has about 4%, Illinois has about 4% of the state that is owned either by the county, state, or federal government. It costs the state of Wisconsin let's see here, it's it's over $1 million a day in interest. When we purchased this land, it wasn't because we had a pile of money laying around. It was basically a credit card that we went out and we bonded for it. We have it's just under $1 billion in bonding that we borrowed to take this property off the tax roll. You've got people in the southern part of the state that, in the areas where it's more populated, that want areas that they can have for biking and hiking and hunting. You've got areas in the northern part of the state where you've got thousands of acres of forest, the Chequamegon and the Nicolet. All of that is counted towards this. What was proposed last in the last budget, the governor proposed spending about $20 million a year on stewardship purchases. I believe only about $5 or $6 million was actually spent last year. We had some things in the budget that basically said that if you want to buy more land, you have to sell off land that is already there. I'm not opposed to having areas for the residents of the state of Wisconsin to go and to enjoy nature and to hunt and fish and camp. But when we start looking at the costs associated with that, it's kind of like the bonding increasing for transportation. At what point is enough, and how much are we going to continue to spend on interest, to keep that level of land ownership? And there are strong lobbies both ways. There are people that are very opposed to stewardship, and there are people that think that the whole state of Wisconsin should be, either owned by the county, state, or federal government. The one problem you do have in some of these areas is when that land is taken off the tax roll, there's PILT payments, payment in lieu of taxes, which are a small portion of what the normal tax payment is. And so a lot of these counties up north that are already hard pressed for revenue, when these big chunks of land are taken off and put into stewardship, they get a very small percentage of revenue. So I believe that 18% of the state of Wisconsin is enough. I would actually like to see some of the areas. And the biggest concern that I had with regards to stewardship is the DNR was going in, and this is how I actually found out about it. I was on an auction site that I get an email on, and it had a bunch of pieces of property, and the DNR was actually paying people to come and tear down old farms and barns. And I didn't I couldn't quite understand why the DNR was buying this. So I investigated and found out there are 3 small tributary rivers in the northern part of the state that the DNR was buying up every piece of land that they could to try to preserve, those 3 tributary rivers. And they would abandon these farms, the 100-year-old farms. They would pay people to come in to tear the barn and the old farmhouse down, and then just let the land go back to, prairie. And I just saw a real waste in that. I think there's better ways that we can still, we can have the DNR purchase easements for those rivers. We don't have to be purchasing the actual farms. And they were paying top dollar. This was in the last 6 years. And now they've gone to try to sell some of these properties, and they can't get nearly what they paid for them. And some of the bigger tracts they're actually trying to sell, and there are not a lot of buyers out there for the prices that they paid and what the state wants to recoup. So I'm not against stewardship, per se, but I think that once you start spending that kind of money on interest payments on land that either the county, state, or federal government owns, that's all. When that money, that interest that's being paid, is money that could be going towards the UW, or it could be going towards K-12, or other areas of the budget, Health and Human Services with Family Care and IRIS. So that's a tough area, especially up north when you get in the Door County area. Joel Kitchens is a new rep, a freshman rep, and I went up there and gave an update for joint finance for him when he had his first listening session. He had 125 people in the room, and I would say 100 of them, were demanding that, we buy basically the rest of Door County and keep it so that, there was no, so that it was all public. They didn't want any private ownership up there. And these are people that come from Illinois that move up there and they just want it preserved. So.
I think stewardship's a good program. If we need to tweak it, we should, but I don't think we should cut it for 13 years because it's, locally it's been a good partner program, and around the state you don't want to miss opportunities by waiting 13 years until we're able to buy land again. I think the sale of state assets, if there's really something that we're not using anymore, and it makes sense, through a pretty strict criteria, then I could see it. I think I get real nervous when we talk about selling off our, power plants or, selling something off and leasing it back. Examples in other states have proven not to be a sound investment. Or I think about Chicago maybe selling off their property for a lump sum and then having massive parking increases that are out of their control. So.
Okay, a number of people have asked a question along these lines, and so I'm going to move this one. Medicaid spending rose by $1 billion. Is now the time to accept federal dollars available through the Affordable Care Act? And then another person asks specifically about the budget impact of accepting that money.
Yeah, so I think I made that pretty clear before, and this is, one we've been discussing since the Affordable Care Act passed, but increasingly we've found ourselves to be doing our own thing. Indiana under Governor Mike Pence, hardly a liberal governor, came up with a way to take the federal funding. Iowa also took the federal funding and did a private option. So it's hard to imagine a guy like Governor Thompson, who was awfully creative with Medicaid waiver programs, creating Badger Care, Family Care, turning down the opportunity to get a waiver for a plan and utilize federal funding. And I think this is one where, if we're going to say, well, it's taxpayer money, then we should reject all federal money if we want to be honest. And we know we won't do that. But I think this is one where the governor has different, priorities at this point. It may sell well to say I'm the only governor running for president that didn't take federal Medicaid money. And that might be great in Iowa, but it's terrible in Wisconsin. There are Medicaid costs that we do need to get under control. A lot of it is, a long-term care portion of it is actually a smaller part. It's gone down as a percentage of the total Medicaid budget, but there are always things that we need to try to do. But in this case, you can take the federal money, and if it goes away, you can sunset it, and make a decision at the point that it goes away that you're not going to be able to do it. So, to me, it should be certainly should be looked at.
Well, this was a question actually in last Friday's exec session that comment was made about us not accepting the $345 million. And so I actually put a call in on my way home to Bob Lang, and he got back to me. He's doing a little bit of research for me. The way I look at it, I believe there are still 11 other states that have not accepted the Medicaid expansion dollars. The difference is that the part of the equation that's being left out is the fact that we did expand Badger Care. We actually expanded it so that I believe it's 48,000 people, additional people. There used to be waiting lists to get on Badger Care. Those waiting lists are gone because of the money that we funded. We have a $18.1 trillion federal deficit. And in the past, we've seen it typically happen where the federal government dangles this money out, and they make it available for a certain period of time. This is the governor's concern. This is the Republican legislature's concern, is that money is not going to be there forever. And if you stretch it out, and this is Bob Lang's doing the numbers for me, if you stretch it out, it'll end up actually costing the state a lot more. Reason we didn't take it is because when you go out to 2023, 2026, that portion that the federal government is going to supply diminishes significantly. And if you look at total Medicaid monies that have come into the state, even though we didn't accept the $345 million, there was still $716 million that did flow through. It just didn't flow through the state's coffers because of the fact that we expanded Medicaid. So it's a little misleading when people say, well, why don't you just accept the $345 million? It's a lot. It's a more significant equation than just accepting the $345 million.
Is that true, Gordon?
We're going to move on to the next question.
I'm sure it'll come up again.
The manufacturing and agricultural tax credit have already reduced taxes on the owners of factories and farms by more than the original projections. The third installment started January 1st of this year, and the fourth installment will start January 1st of next year. Why not delay the final installments?
I already answered that. Speed round.
I'm not going to take credit for that because that was done in the legislature before I was elected. Actually, in the previous year to when I was elected. I do believe that there are benefits with regards to the MAC credits because basically what you see is those tax savings that these agriculture and manufacturing organizations are saving, they're putting that back into real buildings and growing their businesses. That's part of what the credit is about. They're just not padding their pockets, they're expanding their businesses. It's a significant amount. It was underestimated. Mark Harris, actually brought it to my attention 2 years ago and said that he felt that the legislature underestimated. I went back to Dale Koyanga, who was on Joint Finance last session also, and confirmed the fact that more people took advantage of it. That is something that's going to pay dividends. It's hard to see it right now, but down the road there's going to be more jobs created because these businesses have expanded their businesses. There's going to be more tax revenue coming in from income tax and sales and use tax when the full effect takes place. There is another tax credit, the historic building tax credit, that Gordon voted for. I'm pretty sure you voted for that. It's another tax credit that some people in my caucus are against, but it's something that you've got it happening in Iowa and some of these other states. You've got a lot of historic buildings in the state of Wisconsin. We've had a significant portion of those tax credits used in this area, in my district, in the city of Oshkosh and some other surrounding areas. That down the road, it increases economic development. And so those are things that aren't necessarily going to be seen right away. Hopefully they pay dividends down the road. So I don't know what more I can say about that.
Let's move on. This one might be a pretty quick one. What's your stance on closing down the 60 correctional officer positions over 2 years, the third shift towers at the correctional facilities?
Well, I happen to have the most correctional facilities out of any other district. I have actually 8 correctional facilities in the 53rd district. A number of them here in Oshkosh and Waupun with Dodge Correctional and John Burke and Waupun Correctional. So the general trend in the nation is to get away from the tower system. New correctional facilities that are being built without towers. That being said, I think that, and Senator Gudix and I both attended a meeting in Waupun. We heard from the people that live in the city. There's a lot of concern. There hasn't been a prison break in I think it's been 30 or 40 years from Waupun. But there's a lot of concern from the people that live in Waupun that there's gonna be less security in that area if the guard towers are taken away. This is the time in most of these correctional facilities, that third shift, for 7 hours, 7 out of the 8 hours, the inmates are basically in bed sleeping. At Waupun, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, first shift has about 110 to 115 correctional officers on first shift. When you go to third shift, it drops down to 23 officers. Not all the towers would be eliminated. The Sally Port in Waupun would still have a guard tower. And I expressed my concern to Secretary Wall and to Warden Pollard about, the changes. I don't know that I'm necessarily for the changes. I don't know that, the cost savings involved, is really worth the amount of fear that people that live in that area have. There are some things that can be done. The big concern was at, I believe it's about 4 o'clock in the morning, there's about 20 or 25 prisoners that go from their sleeping bunks, they're let out of their cells, and they're marched and they go into the food service area to start breakfast in the morning. And I asked the question, could somebody go up in that tower for that 1 hour period of time? And what I heard in Waupun, that was the most significant time that they felt that there was going to be issues, is at that time where there's 25 of them, and if they didn't have everybody up in the towers. One thing you are looking at is I believe they're 20-foot towers. They're surrounded by barbed wire. I think the bigger thing that I'm concerned about, and I know Secretary Wall is concerned about, and nationwide is a bigger concern, and that is the use of drones. And that's something that, the technology is expanding. They have caught different, in different areas in the state of Wisconsin, people using drones to drop paraphernalia in the prison areas. At some point, somebody's gonna develop a drone that's gonna be able to be strong enough to, God forbid, have somebody arm it with a couple guns and have the drone fly over and drop the guns. I mean, that is a huge concern. Now, the warden and Secretary Wall is guaranteed that in some of these areas they're going to have infrared. They'll have a lot of different cameras. They're going to upgrade their camera system. I still have concerns about the elimination of the guard towers, but as I said, the general trend in the nation is to eliminate them. And there was also talk actually, about the possibility of taking, you've got Waupun that was built early in the mid 1800s. You've got a lot of hidden areas in Waupun that, are really hard to guard. There was talk about spending the money and building a brand new prison facility that would be state of the art. That new facility would not have guard towers. It would have the walls, it would have the camera systems, have the electrified fences. So, again, I listen to the concerns. Senator Goodix and I do have real concerns, especially for, Waupun that we represent, because, the majority of the people that were at that meeting did not want to see that happen. I don't know that my one vote alone is going to be able to, to stop that from happening.
Yeah, Mike gave a pretty good overview. I think there's a lot of unknowns. I'd prefer if there was going to be a discussion about this that there's, a separate hearing. I mean, we have, different concerns, both with making sure the community immediately surrounded understands what this means, but first and foremost, the security of the people who work there. I can tell you when I've done a tour with, workers, that was, if anything goes wrong in the field, run towards the tower. And so that's sort of, when you're talking about working in those kind of, and none of us can really relate to it unless you've actually, been in there. I can think of a number of other areas of corrections that I would look to save money before I would think about eliminating something like that. I think there's maybe some feeling that, well, it's only third shift, but I think someone was quoted in the paper saying is, well, yeah, there haven't been any incidents, and the reason there haven't been any incidents is because we've had someone in the towers. And I think the issue I was going to bring up, and Mike did, was we have heard, increasing use of drones and other things. It would seem to be that, until we get infrared technology or some of these things in place, it sure would make sense to have someone, up in the tower looking for someone alongside or on the inside trying to drop something in. So I don't support that change.
We've got two questions here regarding increases in ways to fund transportation. One is why are vehicle registration fees increasing on cars that are fuel efficient? And then another one person asks, is there anything in the budget to increase the gas tax? If not, can you propose it?
Well, this is going to be a really interesting discussion. So, I forgot to mention this earlier because this is an area where I think there's bipartisan opposition to what's being proposed. And there's also bipartisan appreciation of unpopular solutions. And actually, I wasn't in the legislature when they repealed gas tax indexing, and Mike's right. It was a short-sighted decision, especially given what it's cost us overall. But the governor in 2011 had a transportation finance commission, with a number of different stakeholders that looked at our long-term transportation and infrastructure needs, with new projects, old projects, public transit, a number of our, across the state, and looked at trends, models, and ways to finance things. And they made a number of different recommendations. And I think this was supposed to sort of cover, give some ideas and provide here's the pragmatic cover that you need to be able to make some tough decisions and govern. Now, I remember asking my constituents in a survey, I kind of gave them all the ugly choices. Do you support increasing the gas tax? Do you support tolls? Do you support higher vehicle registration fees? Or do you support, crappier roads? And they said crappier roads. Even though I know that I don't know, if you've driven on Otter Avenue recently, I don't think it can't get much worse, and that is my way to go west in the city. That being said, we're elected to make the tough decisions, and this has been a kind of a schizophrenic one, and I will say it's probably another one where I think the presidential campaign might be getting into our decision-making a little bit. The governor's Secretary of Transportation, who was active with that commission, and said all summer into the campaign that we were going to raise revenues to provide some stable funding sources, and then came out with a budget in November that increased some revenues. I think it changed the formula to increase diesel fuel tax, which trucks use, which does provide is harder on our roads. That is the proposal that also included the electric vehicle tax or charge. It also had some other new, tax on new sales of vehicles, some things that were unpopular, but they were new revenues, and it was a serious proposal. It was a little surprising when just, the governor kind of said, well, that's just my transportation secretary, doing his own thing, and then came out with his budget, which didn't include any new revenue, and just said, we're just going to bond $1.3 billion. And that was met with some pretty cold response. And so now it's in our lap, and that's the challenge is, none of the options is that popular. It's sort of like, no one wants their property taxes to increase, but most people want really good schools. Nobody wants to pay higher vehicle registration fees, but we don't want to keep borrowing for roads. And, it's my hope that we can, that I can support something that borrows less, because we also are not doing a capital program for what we normally borrow in the state, because we're going to borrow so much for roads. I think the governor is trying to make it through the presidential election without raising any, fees or taxes, because again, that probably plays better. But, we don't want to just kick the can down the road. We were going to take up transportation this week. We're not now. And, I will have to see I've had some conversations with my colleagues on the other side, and also expressed my willingness to help support, given that they may have some divisions on their own between people that don't want to raise the gas tax and some of those who do. You know, there are a number of different ways, and other states are struggling with this as well, as is the federal government. You know, we've got some sort of weird things. Construction costs have gone up. Fuel is actually, you know, kind of low, but people are driving less. You know, driving has been going down since 2006. You know, people 18 to 34 increasingly, you know, would prefer not to drive and want to live in places that have good transportation systems. So, you know, I think the challenge, you know, one thing that Secretary Gottlieb said when it was unfortunate that he had to then come testify in support of everything that he didn't believe in, which the governor introduced, and I like Mark and I chided him kiddingly, but, you know, he said that you don't want to reduce the level of spending because it will delay projects. And in some of those big projects that do have a big price tag on them, it's not just a Milwaukee project, you know, about all the goods that are produced in Northeast Wisconsin that are, you know, come out of here, that make it to the market in Chicago, go through the transportation infrastructure in Milwaukee. And it is about, you know, safety, it's about efficiency, it's about time and speed. I'm not saying that some of these engineering marvels, I enjoy driving up to Winneconne. I don't know always if we needed that Los Angeles freeway overpass. It's very nice. Or when I drive through Wausau, you know, I'm 100 feet off the ground. But, you know, it is safer. I'm really pleased with the Highway 41 expansion project, and I'm glad we got that done before we had to make some of these decisions. So I'm hoping there's going to be openness. Mike might be able to tip us off and tell me what we're going to do.
Well, I did not take the no tax increase pledge. I know it wouldn't be real popular with my colleagues to increase the gas tax. I actually have proposed reinstating indexing, but there is really no appetite in that. As I said, all it takes is 10 to 12 members in our caucus, and it pretty much kills an idea. And I think that if we would reinstate indexing, as I said, if you go back to 2007, the gas tax would only be about 4 to 4.5 cents higher than it is right now. We'd have an extra almost $1 billion in there. I think one good thing that we did do is that we changed the Constitution to eliminate, you know, any future raids on the transportation fund. That was an important step because in past administrations, both sides, that fund built up, and that was an easy area to raid. When, you know, the state government needed to go into the coffers and have, you know, collect money from different areas. So I don't know where we're going to end up. Looking at my crystal ball, I don't see us increasing the gas tax. Tolling is pretty much off the table because of federal issues involved in that. I think the easiest thing would be to raise the gas tax, or at least put indexing back on, because then you're taxing the out-of-state people that are driving through to Door County and, you know, driving through our state, rather than just taxing, you know, the individuals in the state of Wisconsin. But the appetite for that increase is not very high. So, you know, that is going to be something that will come towards the end of May. That'll be one of the problem areas that, you know, will be in Madison real late on those evenings, probably well past midnight, hammering out what exactly we're going to do with regards to transportation. I wouldn't be opposed to, you know, reinstating indexing, and if we had a bad year that, you know, the economy was a little soft, we could have a passive review type of thing where it would come back in front of joint finance, and we wouldn't have to have a, you know, 1.6 or whatever, you know, CPI is. We wouldn't have to have an increase in a certain year. I think that's an easy decision. It takes the, you know, the tax raising decision out of the hands of every individual in my caucus, and, you know, puts it back on indexing. And as Gordon agreed with me, I think that was a really bad move in 2007 when it was eliminated. But as far as increasing, I think there is maybe a little bit of appetite for increasing registration fees from $75 to $100, but even that is going to be a tough sell. And we really haven't had a caucus-wide discussion and put hands up and seen where the numbers are. I know we have what's called budget buddy meetings, and I have 10, there's 6 Republicans on joint finance, and I don't know if you have budget buddy meetings or not, but the minority party, but it is in the majority party. I have 10 members in my caucus that are my budget buddies that I give updates, and I put my feelers out and take their temperatures. And in my particular budget buddy group, there's 7 or 8 out of the 10 that are adamantly opposed to increasing, whether it's the gas tax or reinstating indexing. So that is going to be a hard sell. And I don't know where we end up.
We've got about 15 more minutes and 3 more questions I hope we can cover. Number of people have asked about the non-emergency medical transportation and how the current budget relates to non-emergency medical transportation.
I am not a big...
I'm not going to be able to speak as any authority on that.
All right, we'll move on. Looks like we'll have more time to answer these last 2 questions then. Cities need flexibility in state mandates. What policies or programs increase flexibility in operations of cities? That doesn't sound like a budget question as much as a policy question, but while you're here in front of everyone.
You can go first.
Yeah, thanks. There's been a lot of debates about, what should be a state issue, what should be a local issue, things that are usurping local control. We just passed sort of statewide rideshare services bill that, some parts of the state probably hadn't considered it. In Madison, which has a robust, active, highly regulated cab community, they were totally opposed to it. This is for the Uber bill. Those things, some viewed as an outright, attack on local control. Anytime we get a thing that, imposes, something on local government and the dollars don't follow or the dollars don't totally pay for it, we have that debate and discussion. I don't know, in this budget, I think it comes up on a case-by-case basis, but I think maybe my head's been so wrapped in to some of these numbers. I think listening to Mike and I talk a little bit, I think we've been getting in the weeds a little bit, and I think it's because we've been reading our memos on a lot of areas. So I don't know. We always try to, and I will say this, our local leaders at the county and the municipal level are really good about sharing their concerns and ideas that might have some appeal or might look good initially, but that ultimately have unintended consequences in the long term. One of the biggest things that we struggle with, I think there's a lot of support in the state to put 17-year-olds back in the juvenile system and not in our adult corrections system. And one of the challenges with that is, I think we got to the point last year where we had support for that, but we didn't have the money. In other words, the counties were the ones who said, that's great, I'm glad you guys have come around, that'd be a great change, but if you leave them to us and don't provide the money, that's a change that, is gonna have a negative fiscal impact on us. And so if we want to do the right thing and put 17-year-olds back in our juvenile system, we need to provide the money.
As Gordon said, a lot of my time has been involved in the last month or so just reading the white papers and fiscal notes. I don't know if Gordon has woken up at 4 or 5 in the morning with the budget book on his chest or not, but that's happened to me
Paper
on a number
cuts on
of
my face.
occasions. I always look at different bills that are being presented. Not every idea makes a great bill, and I won't go into the weeds. I've got a couple examples, but the one thing regarding mandates, I guess that I can think of that we ended up that we did kill, and there might be some counties that would be agreeable to it, would be the assessing that was being done at the township level, municipality level, 1,859 townships, whatever there are. We've got a couple bad players that don't assess to the full market value, and so Department of Revenue, for whatever reason, the last 6-7 years has been trying to push this policy, and pushing so that the assessing would stop at the municipality level, the township level, and it would be done at the county level. And right now, the average cost per parcel is about $6, and there were some estimates. It was a Ledge Council study done, I believe. It showed that that cost would increase to anywhere from $20 to $25 if it went to the county level. So the townships are obviously nervous because, besides fire protection and garbage pickup, one of their big responsibilities is town assessing. And so that's why my townships were against it. Fond du Lac County, I had a meeting with the leaders in Fond du Lac County, and they were actually against the move also, because what they found out is the counties were only going to be able to assess at 85% of the total value that had been assessed for that previous year. And when they did the numbers, they were going to have a budget shortfall of $1 million a year, that they didn't know where they were going to make that up if that would have been switched over. So I think it's important, as legislators, to always take a look at, how it affects local government, even the schools. I had a group of very bright college kids that came in on Friday, right before we had our exec session, and they were really excited about a new bill that I think they called it, what the name of it was? It was the, not exercise bill.
It's Weniger's old bill, right?
Yeah. So basically what they want to do is they want to have school children exercise for 30 minutes a day minimum. And, the reason for that is they want to reduce obesity and get kids exercising. Obesity leads to diabetes and, all the ill health effects. And what they didn't realize, this is really an unfunded mandate that, I know, I just see Stan Mack here. I'm sure that he's probably not going to be real favorable of that bill because, that's going to end up costing the school districts more money because they're going to have, additional Phy-Ed teachers. This isn't just letting them outside to run around. These are actual Phy-Ed classes that it would be mandatory. And so on the surface, it looks like a great bill, and but when you start thinking about how it affects individuals and school districts and municipalities, it changes the outlook of the bill a little bit. So I don't know that really has a whole lot of traction. I know that they were just starting to push it in the Capitol last week, so.
I think two more, and we'll just see how long it takes you to respond to this. Are there other policy decisions that are in the budget that you'd like to have removed from the budget?
Well, we did pull the 14 out. I would say that there is even a possibility, I can go back to last session and give you an idea. They had DNA testing in the last session that I was adamantly against. They wanted to increase DNA testing for basically any arrest, whether it was a misdemeanor or a felony. And there was one particular senator that had a constituent that their daughter was raped, and they had this family was very devastated by it, and the senator, there was less of a majority in the Senate, so her one vote on the budget, if she voted no on the budget wouldn't have passed. So this is how policy gets put into the budget. You have, whether it's a senator or representative that is passionate about an issue, and they hold out on voting for the whole budget if they don't get their one piece of policy put in the budget. That's how bad things get put into it. But it happens. As I said, I was glad to see that we pulled 14 items out. I would say that there's, even a chance that more could be pulled out by the end of, by the time we get to the end of the session. But there's just certain things that, for whatever reason, end up getting into the budgets, and whether we like it or not, those are some of the reasons why it happens. There are extenuating circumstances that surround a lot of these decisions, and one person out of the 132 legislators, one person, you know, can make that decision to hold out on a vote on something else, and that's how, you know, ugly stuff ends up in the budget. None of us like it, but, you know, I don't know how you change that. You know, it's tough, because, I mean, every state has it happening. The federal government has it happening even to a larger degree. I don't know if you have any comments or not.
I think there's a lot. I mean, I'm one of those where it's easiest if we would just pull all the policy out of the budget, and I'm sure most people out there would say yes. I will also, you know, put my former adjunct political science instructor hat on and say there are reasons why it's easier, you know, especially when you've got, you know, lobbyists on all sides fighting, shaping bills through the committee process, that, you know, there were some changes made in the budget last year on, you know, the bid process for building projects that I know, because I tried to pass it, would have never made it through the committee process. That got put in the budget, and they got done. Domestic partner benefits in 2009, for those of you that supported those, probably would have never made it through the legislative committee, but were able to get put in the budget. And so that's the, you know, pragmatic side. That being said, in this budget, I think there are a number of things. I mentioned the voucher expansion and the long-term care changes, but the drug testing for unemployment benefits, I think, is, you know, awful and should be removed. I think the alternative teacher licensing provision is, you know, sort of another step in the demise of public education. You know, at some point we won't be able to get teachers, so we'll just hire, you know, somebody who's got some relevant experience in a field. I think it's kind of setting us up for future failure, and I don't think we should be watering down our standards. I mean, the list, they give us a, you know, big list. They come to us item by item. I hope that the 14 items, and there were a lot of good changes that were taken out that I appreciate. I hope there is more to come. I also know that there's probably going to be additional policy items that people may choose to try to get in there. In a perfect world, there wouldn't be any, but I also know that it's a big, complicated process.
Good. Thank you both, gentlemen. And I've been focusing my attention on you for the past hour and a half. I didn't realize how full the room is. Thank you for turning out. I think we had over 50 people come to an event that the Northwestern chose not to publicize. Can I say it that way? Yes, I just did. So thank you. Watch for future events that Citizens for a Strong Oshkosh puts on. We're all about being nonpartisan and helping people understand what's going on and make fair decisions. So thanks for coming out, and thank you both, our legislators.